The pen hit the table before the man across from Luca Moretti even finished speaking. The sound was small, barely a tap, but in that dim private lounge on the 42nd floor, it landed like a gavel. Like a sentence. The three men sitting opposite Luca went very still, the way animals go still when something larger enters their space. No shouting, no threats, not a single raised voice in the room. Just Luca Moretti, seated at the head of a mahogany table in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's rent, watching a man named Grieve slowly understand that the conversation was over. The shipping routes, Lucas said, and his voice was so quiet that Grieve had to lean forward to catch it. All of them. By Friday. Mr. Moretti, with respect, we had an arrangement. We had a negotiation, Luca corrected. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The negotiation is finished. Grieve's lawyer opened his mouth. One look from Luca closed it again. The lawyer studied the ceiling instead. For 11 seconds, Luca counted them, the way he counted everything. Nobody moved. Then Grieve picked up the pen with a hand that wasn't entirely steady, and he signed the document in front of him. All 4 pages. He didn't read a single word. Luca stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. His footsteps were even, unhurried. The door clicked shut behind him, and somewhere inside that lounge, 3 men exhaled simultaneously. In the corridor, his childhood friend and right hand, Matteo Silva, was leaning against the wall, eating a protein bar, looking for all the world like a man waiting for a delayed train. "Done?" Matteo asked. "Done," Lucas said. "How'd he take it?" He signed. Matteo fell in a step beside him. They walked the length of the corridor in silence. That particular silence that had existed between them for 23 years, comfortable and practiced, the silence of men who had shared too much history to fill every moment with noise. "I need a favor," Matteo said, as they stepped into the elevator. "No, you haven't heard it yet. I don't need to." Luca pressed the button for the lobby. "The last favor you asked me cost me 3 weeks of negotiations and a very expensive dinner I didn't enjoy. This one's easy." Matteo finished the protein bar and folded the wrapper precisely, which was something he always did when he was about to ask for something he knew the answer to. "I set up a date. Tonight. I need you to come." Luca looked at him. "Not for you," Matteo added quickly. "For me. I need moral support. Someone set me up with a woman, and I want to go, but I don't want to sit at a 2-person table looking like I'm auditioning for a Netflix documentary about lonely men. Then take a book. Luca, take 2 books. I'm asking you, as your oldest friend, as the man who once told 4 police officers that you were at his cousin's quinceanera when you were absolutely not at his cousin's quinceanera. That was 16 years ago. Favored debt doesn't expire." Matteo held the elevator door as it tried to close. "Just sit there. Drink something. You don't have to talk to anyone. Just exist in the restaurant, so I don't look like I crawled out of my apartment for the first time in 6 months." The elevator waited. Matteo waited. "What time?" Lucas said finally. 8. Wear the gray jacket. The charcoal makes you look like you're about to acquire someone's pension fund." Luca said nothing, which Matteo understood to mean yes. He let the elevator close, grinning at his reflection in the polished steel doors. The restaurant was the kind of place that understood the assignment. Low lighting that made everyone look like they had great skin, wine lists that required reading glasses, background music played at the exact volume that forced people to lean slightly toward each other when they talked. Luca arrived at 7:55 because he arrived everywhere at 7:55. It was a habit so ingrained it had stopped being a habit and become simply who he was. Matteo was already at the table, rearranging his silverware with the nervous energy of a man on trial. He looked up when Luca approached and visibly deflated with relief. "You came. I said I would. You say a lot of things." Matteo straightened immediately. "She's not here yet. Her name is Sophia. She's an architect. She speaks 3 languages. She apparently has very strong opinions about pasta, and she's coming with her roommate because her roommate also thought this was a group thing." He said the last part very quickly. Lucas sat down. "Her roommate. Just someone to even the numbers." You don't have to speak to her. She's a student, I think. Law school, maybe. Something academic. Matteo poured himself water and drank half of it in one go. You're doing me a massive favor. I want you to know that. I am aware. I'll owe you. You already owe me. I'll owe you more. I'll owe you in perpetuity. I'll put it in my will. He stopped, because both of them had noticed the two women walking through the restaurant toward their table, and Matteo's entire face reorganized itself into something approaching wonder at the sight of Sophia, who was tall and laughing at something her companion had just said, her head thrown back, earrings catching the light. Luca registered Sophia. He registered her beauty, her ease, the way she moved through a room like she owned the air in it. And then his eyes moved to the woman beside her, and something happened in his chest that he didn't have a name for. Not immediately. She was laughing too, not loudly, not performing it, just genuinely amused by whatever Sophia had said, her hand briefly covering her mouth as though the laugh had caught her off guard. She was dressed simply, a deep burgundy wrap dress, natural hair pulled up with a few curls loose around her face, and she carried herself with the particular confidence of someone who had never needed a room's approval and had simply stopped thinking about it. She was talking to the server before they even reached the table. Not rudely, not impatiently, just noting something on the menu and asking about it, and the server responded like she'd made his evening better by asking. Matteo stood. Sophia, you look incredible. Matteo. Sophia kissed his cheek with the warmth of someone who had decided they liked a person and saw no reason to be subtle about it. This is my roommate, Isabella. Isabella, this is Matteo. And she looked at Luca, who had risen from his seat the way he rose for everything, with a composed and unhurried economy of movement. You must be the famous Luca. Famous is generous, Lucas said. Isabella turned to look at him. Their eyes met. She did not look away. She did not smile reflexively. She simply looked at him with the direct, assessing, entirely comfortable gaze of a woman who was accustomed to looking at things clearly. Isabella Reyes, she said, and extended her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm. Her hand was warm. He was aware of both facts longer than was strictly necessary. Luca Moretti. I know, she said. She held his gaze for another second, something thoughtful behind her eyes, and then she sat down and turned to study the menu. He sat down too. He had no idea why that moment felt like the start of something. The first 15 minutes were exactly what Luca had expected. The necessary small talk of people getting their bearings around each other, the pleasant noise of table being warmed up. Matteo was clearly delighted with Sophia. They discovered within 12 minutes that they both had fierce, complicated feelings about the correct way to make arroz con pollo, and from that point forward the conversation between them required no further fuel. They were entirely self-sustaining, which left Luca and Isabella in the quiet space beside them, like two people sharing an armrest on a plane, aware of each other without requiring anything. You don't need to talk to me, Isabella said suddenly. He looked at her. Saw the... Matteo gave you the friend duty speech. I'm guessing. She nodded toward the other two, who were now passionately debating whether achiote had any place in a proper sofrito. Sophia gave me the same one. Just come. It won't be weird. You don't have to entertain anyone. She said the last part in a slightly higher voice that was, apparently, Sophia. So if you're planning to sit there looking important for 2 hours and go home, I completely understand. I brought a reading app. Luca blinked. That had not been what he expected her to say. You were going to read at dinner? I've read at worse places. Such as... She considered this with complete seriousness. A disciplinary hearing once. And a funeral. Though in my defense the funeral was for a man none of us had actually met and the eulogy was 40 minutes long. She paused. I feel like I should clarify. It was a work obligation, not a personal character flaw. Reading at a funeral is absolutely a personal character flaw, Lucas said. It was discreet. It's still a character flaw. She smiled at that. Not the polite social smile he'd seen her aim at the server, but something quicker and more genuine, like she hadn't expected to find it funny. Fair enough. What's yours? He paused. My character flaw. You just named mine in about 4 seconds. Seems fair. He thought about it. Not because he didn't have an answer. He had many answers, a long and well-documented list of things that would be considered character flaws in any civilized accounting, but because he was trying to decide which one to give her. He found, somewhat unusually, that he didn't want to give her a managed answer. I don't trust people easily, he said. That's not a flaw. That's just sense. I also, he said, make decisions for other people without asking them first. Something shifted in her expression, not negatively, more like she was filing it somewhere useful. That, she said, is actually a flaw. She picked up her wine glass. What do you do, Luca Moretti? Business. What kind? Multiple kinds. She looked at him with the patience of someone who had sat through enough evasive answers to recognize one when it arrived. Right. And I study international law, specifically the financial architecture of organized crime. So multiple kinds of business is either very boring or very interesting, depending on what you're not saying. The table went slightly quieter. Matteo and Sophia were still talking, but at a lower frequency, the way background noise dims when something else demands attention. Luca looked at Isabella Reyes, at the way she held his gaze without challenge or aggression, just a plain and absolute refusal to pretend she hadn't said what she'd said. Tell me about your research, he said. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she set down her glass. Why? Because you said something interesting, he said. And I haven't been interested in a dinner conversation in longer than I'd like to admit. She studied him. He got the sense that she was very good at studying things. The world doesn't move because of powerful men, she said. That's the argument at the center of my thesis. It moves because of the choices powerful men make, and the structures they build to make sure no one can hold them accountable for those choices. She paused. Most people at dinner parties either tell me that's obvious or tell me it's wrong. Neither of those people are usually very interesting to talk to either. What do I tell you? Lucas said. I don't know yet. She tilted her head slightly. What do you tell me? The candle between them had been burning low for 20 minutes. In the warm, unsteady light, Luca Moretti did something he hadn't done at a dinner table in years. He answered honestly. I tell you, he said quietly, that you're right, and that the men who build those structures know exactly what they're doing, and that most of them do it because no one ever made the cost clear enough to matter. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people realize they are having a different conversation than the one they sat down for. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, slowly, like she had solved a small part of a large equation and was noting the answer down. You're more interesting than I expected, she said. You're more dangerous than you look, he replied. She smiled again. This time it reached her eyes. Fully. He drove home at 11:43. He sat in the car outside his building for 4 minutes before going in, which was something he had never done in his life. He was not a man who sat in cars thinking. He was a man who moved from one thing to the next with the smooth efficiency of a mechanism designed for precision. But he sat in the car for 4 minutes, replaying a dinner conversation the way a composer replays a melody, not to analyze it, but because he wasn't done with it yet. He called Matteo at 11:50. How was Sophia? He said, before Matteo could speak. Luca. Matteo's voice was entirely too satisfied. It's almost midnight. Are you calling to ask about my date? I'm making conversation. You never make conversation at midnight. You sleep at 10:45 like a very disciplined 60-year-old. A pause. You want to ask about Isabella? Lucas said nothing. She's remarkable, Matteo said, dropping the teasing entirely. Sophia talks about her all the time. First in her law program, writing a thesis that apparently has half the faculty terrified and the other half trying to claim credit for it. She grew up in Miami. Her mother is Belizean. Her father's side is from the Dominican Republic. She interned with an anti-corruption unit last summer. Another pause. Luca. What? She studies criminal financial networks. For her career. I'm aware. So you understand what I'm about to say. Good night, Matteo. He hung up. He sat in the car for another 2 minutes. Then he went inside. He did not sleep at 10:45. He did not sleep until 2. He had her researched by 9 the next morning, which he recognized was not a romantic gesture but couldn't seem to stop himself from doing. Her full name was Isabella Carmen Reyes, 29 years old, born in Miami, raised partly in London, currently in her final year of an international law postgraduate program. Her undergraduate thesis had won 2 awards. Her current dissertation topic, Structural Legitimacy as a Shield, How Criminal Networks Survive Regulatory Reform. She had interned with the Financial Intelligence Unit of the Attorney General's office. She had been quoted in 2 law journals. She had a 4.1 GPA. He closed the file and stared at his office ceiling. He called her that afternoon. He didn't have her number. He called Matteo, who called Sophia, who called Isabella, who, according to Matteo's subsequent report, paused for a moment and then said, "Fine, but I picked a place." She picked a museum, not a restaurant, not a bar, not somewhere with low lighting and a curated atmosphere designed to facilitate a certain kind of conversation. A museum, specifically the contemporary art wing of the city's main gallery, which was free on Thursdays, and, she informed him when he arrived at the front steps at exactly 1 o'clock, had an exhibit on financial systems that she had been meaning to see for 3 weeks. "You're taking me to an exhibit about financial systems," Lucas said. "I'm going to an exhibit about financial systems," Isabella corrected, falling into step beside him through the glass doors. "You're welcome to come." He came. The exhibit was unusual. Large format photographs of trading floors and bank vaults interspersed with conceptual art pieces that reframed wealth as a kind of cartography. Isabella moved through it slowly and deliberately, pausing at each installation with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely processing rather than passively observing. "This one," she said, stopping in front of a piece. A glass case full of paper documents, contracts, and agreements layered so thickly they'd become illegible, is exactly what I'm writing about. The legitimacy barrier. By the time a criminal network is successful enough to be worth dismantling, it has generated so much paper, so many real contracts, real employees, real subsidiaries, that pulling it apart destroys legitimate livelihoods alongside the illegal ones. So nobody pulls it apart. What's the solution? Luca asked. Transparency at the formation stage. Stop the paper from accumulating, which requires regulators with teeth, which requires political will, which requires, she exhaled, an enormous amount of things that don't currently exist in sufficient quantities. "You sound tired," he said. She looked at him, surprised. "I sound tired?" "Not in a bad way. In the way of someone who has been working on a problem they care about for a long time and can see exactly what the solution is and exactly how far away it is." She was quiet for a moment. They moved to the next piece. A map of shell company registrations, trails of ownership, radiating from a central point like a web. "Do you know what makes this work?" she said, gesturing at the map. "What makes the whole structure hold together?" "Fear," Lucas said immediately. She shook her head. "Distance. Fear is a tool you use once, and then it costs you. Distance between the person at the top and the harm they cause is a tool you can use indefinitely. As long as the CEO never personally hands money to the person being exploited, as long as the structure has enough layers to make direct responsibility unprovable." She stopped. She was looking at the map. The man at the center of this never went to prison. He died in his house, in Switzerland, of natural causes. She said it without heat, which somehow made it sound worse than anger would have. Luca looked at the map. He looked at the radiating lines. He thought about a signed contract on a mahogany table and 3 men with their careful faces. "What made you choose this?" he said. "This specific problem." Isabella turned to him. Her expression was open in a way that he was beginning to understand was not the default for her, that she chose when to be open with the same deliberateness she brought to everything else. "When I was 14, my uncle lost his business. His actual, real, legitimate business. A logistics company he'd built over 11 years. He lost it because a shell company he'd contracted with turned out to be a front for money laundering. When the investigation came, Everything it had touched got frozen, including his accounts. He never recovered. He died 4 years later. Heart attack. He was 51. She looked back at the map. My mother still says it wasn't the money that killed him. It was the humiliation, the sense that the rules had never actually been for people like him. Luca said nothing for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally, and he meant it with the full weight of the word, which was not something he deployed lightly. She looked at him, and there it was again, that direct, assessing, entirely comfortable gaze, as though she were reading something written in a language she knew well. "You are," she said, like she was confirming a calculation. "That's interesting." "Why interesting?" "Because most people say I'm sorry to close a subject," she said. "You said to open one." She turned and walked toward the next piece. "Come on. There's a section on offshore accounts I want to show you." He followed her. He was aware, with a clarity that was uncomfortable and entirely unfamiliar, that he was falling for this woman. Not in the accelerated, convenient way of attraction. He had experienced that before and recognized its lightness. This was different, heavier, the kind of thing that, once it started, tended to rearrange things. It was also, given the situation, potentially the worst-timed development of his adult life. They stayed in the museum for 2.5 hours. When they came out into the afternoon light, she turned to him on the steps. "Why did you want to see me again?" she asked. "Honestly, because you said something at dinner that I haven't been able to stop thinking about." "Which part?" "The part about the choices powerful men make," he said, "and the structures they build so no one can hold them accountable." He paused. "You were looking at me when you said it." Isabella studied him. "I wasn't looking at you specifically. You were looking at me specifically." "A beat." "Maybe," she said. "Doesn't mean I was talking about you specifically." "Weren't you?" The afternoon light fell across her face, and she looked at him for a long moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read, something complex moving behind her eyes, a calculation being run. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'll let you know when I do." She put her sunglasses on. She walked down the steps, and Lucas stood on the museum steps watching her go and felt something in his chest that had been sealed for a very long time begin, very slowly, to open. He should have told her then. He knew it later. In the arithmetic of honesty, there is a window, narrow and closing, where the truth disclosed voluntarily can be received as trust. He knew where that window was. He had simply stood at it without opening it, and the window closed. She found out on a Thursday, 9 days after the museum. He wasn't there when it happened. He was in a meeting across the city, reviewing legitimate property acquisitions, when his phone buzzed. He looked at it. Unknown number. He let it ring. Then Matteo called. "Luca." His voice was different. "Sophia just called me." Isabella found something. He didn't need Matteo to tell him what. He sat very still in the middle of his meeting, surrounded by men talking about zoning permits, and understood that the window had closed. He got to the park where she had told him to meet her. She'd sent the address in a text with no other words at 7:15. She was already there, standing near the water, her back mostly to him, still in the clothes she'd been in when she finished her seminars. Her arms were crossed, not defensively, but like she was holding something in. She heard him approach and turned around. She was holding her phone. On the screen, even from a distance, he could see a photograph of his own face. "Luca Moretti," she said, "also known in several investigative reports as the Chancellor, linked to 7 shell corporations, 3 logistics firms, 2 construction companies currently under the control of—" She stopped herself. Her voice was very controlled, and that control was costing her something. "I've been writing about men like you for 2 years. I have the structural diagrams of 2 organizations that look almost exactly like yours on my dissertation wall." "Isabella, don't." She held up her hand, not sharply, but with a finality that landed like a wall. "I need you to not say my name like that right now. I need you to just stand there and let me say what I need to say." He stood there. "You sat across from me at dinner and let me talk about criminal financial networks," she said. "You came to a museum exhibit about shell companies. You listened to me talk about my uncle." Her voice wavered on the last word, briefly, before she steadied it. "You let me tell you about my uncle." And she stopped. She looked away, then back. "Did you think I would never find out? Or did you just not think about it?" "Neither," he said. "Then what?" "I thought." He paused, and in the pause was the honest answer, which was the only kind she would accept. "I thought I had time to figure out how to say it." "How to say it?" She repeated it quietly. "You had 9 days. That's enough time to say most things." "I know. Why didn't you?" He looked at her across the strip of path between them, and he gave her the only thing he had that was worth giving, the truth. "Because every time I was going to, I thought about the way you look at me, the way you've been looking at me, and I didn't want that to change before I had." He stopped. Started again. "Before I was sure it was real." The silence between them was very long. The water moved. Somewhere behind them, a group of students passed with bicycle wheels hissing against the path. "You profit from a system I'm trying to dismantle," Isabella said. Her voice was quiet now. The anger had burned through to something underneath, which was worse. "The harm that your operations cause, the families, the communities, the people like my uncle who lose everything because they got too close to the edges of how you operate." She shook her head. "I'm not naive. I didn't think you were entirely clean. But I didn't think." She gestured at the phone, at the photograph, at everything it represented. He said nothing because there was nothing to say that would make that wrong. She looked at him for a long, final moment. "I need time," she said, "and I need distance, and I need you to not call me." She turned and walked away along the path, and he watched her go, and this time the feeling in his chest was not opening. It was the particular and specific pain of a door closing on something that had mattered more than he had allowed himself to know. He sat in his car for 40 minutes that night. Then he went upstairs, and he didn't sleep at all. He sat in the dark of his living room, in the apartment that was so clean and so controlled and so deliberately absent of anything unnecessary, and he thought about a woman in a museum pointing at a map of shell companies. He thought about her uncle. He thought about the way she'd said before I was sure it was real. He'd said it about himself, but he could see by the look on her face that it had landed somewhere in her, too, and that it had mattered, and that she was angry in part because it had mattered. He called no one. He thought for a long time. By morning, he had made a decision, not because of Isabella, or not only because of Isabella, but because a woman he respected had stood across from him and not looked away, and shown him, with her plain and patient clarity, what he already knew but had been declining to face, that the distance between him and the harm in his wake had stopped being a comfort and become, instead, a weight. He called his attorney at 7 in the morning. His attorney, a precise and extremely well-compensated woman named Dr. Chun, listened to what he said without interrupting. "You understand," she said, when he finished, "that this process will take months, that it will involve significant financial exposure, that the restructuring you're describing will require external oversight and the cooperation of regulatory bodies that, until now, you have operated by keeping at a distance." "I understand," Lucas said. "And you want to proceed." "I want to proceed." A pause. "I'll need 3 days to model the structure. Then we meet." "Thank you, Dr. Chun." He hung up and looked out the window at the city, which was doing what cities do, moving, indifferent, enormous, full of people with varying relationships to the systems that sustain them. He thought about what Isabella had said. The world doesn't move because of powerful men. It moves because of their decisions. He thought, let's see if that's true. Damien Kwan struck on a Tuesday, as Luca had expected he would. Damien was patient and he was watchful, and he had been waiting for 2 things, a sign of weakness and a moment when Luca's attention was elsewhere. He got both at once. A warehouse in the southern logistics corridor. Not Luca's most significant operation, but significant enough to be a statement, was hit on a Tuesday night. Equipment destroyed. One of Luca's security men put in the hospital with injuries that were serious but not critical. A message left, not in words, but in the particular signature of damage that Damien's people favored. Luca's lieutenants assembled at 8 the next morning. There were 4 of them, men who had been with him a long time, who had built their lives and their futures on the assumption that Luca Moretti operated by a certain logic, a certain code of response. "We need to move tonight," said a man called Reeves, who managed the northern routes. "Anything less is an invitation." "Agreed," said the man to his left. The other two looked at Luca. Luca was looking at the photographs of the warehouse damage on his tablet. He set the tablet down. "No response," he said. The room went very still. "Luca," Reeves said carefully, "you understand what that looks like." "No response," Luca repeated. "Tell your people to stand down. If Quan makes another move, we document it and route it through legitimate channels." Legitimate channels. Reeves said it like the words were in a foreign language. "We're restructuring," Lucas said. "That restructuring started 3 days ago, and it doesn't stop because Damien Quan wants to test his luck. We absorb this. We document it. We cooperate with the insurance investigators and the police report, and we do nothing else." The silence in the room was dense enough to have texture. "What does that mean for our routes?" asked the man on the left. "The routes that can be legitimized will be. The ones that can't will be wound down." Luca looked at each of them in turn. "I know what this means for your operations. We'll restructure compensation accordingly. But the answer to Quan is no response, and the answer tomorrow will be the same, and the answer after that." He paused. "We're done operating by those rules." He left the room before anyone could argue. Behind him, he heard the particular quality of silence that follows a detonation. All the displaced air, all the reconfigured assumptions, rushing back in to fill the space. He held the press conference on a Thursday morning, from the lobby of the main offices of what had been, until recently, a logistics company of entirely opaque ownership and was now, following 72 hours of Dr. Chen's extraordinary legal precision, in the process of becoming something a great deal more transparent. He had not prepared a speech. He had prepared 3 sentences, because he had found in his experience that the shorter the statement, the harder it was to attack. "What I have operated," he said, into a cluster of microphones and a room of journalists who had been sent the press release and arrived expecting management speak and denial, requires a level of transparency I have withheld. That changes as of today. We will cooperate fully with every relevant regulatory body, and we will not obstruct any ongoing investigations." He paused. "That's all I have." The questions came in volume. He answered 4 of them, directly and honestly, and then he left. He did not watch the coverage. He had Dr. Chen's team monitoring it. What he did instead was drive to a quiet office in the business district where he sat with 3 external auditors and began the slow, meticulous, occasionally painful work of opening every file. Isabella watched the press conference on her laptop. She watched it twice. Then she closed the laptop and sat at her desk for a long time. Sophia found her there 20 minutes later, still sitting in the same position. "I saw it," Sophia said carefully, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," Isabella said honestly. Do you think he means it?" Isabella was quiet for a moment. The press conference was 12 sentences. He didn't deflect anything. He used the word withheld. She paused. Men who are performing change use different words. They use moving forward and new direction, and we look forward to working with. He didn't use any of those. She picked up her pen and set it back down, which either means he's better at performance than any press release I've ever read, or he means it. Her email pinged. She looked at it. Anonymous, routed through a law firm she didn't immediately recognize. She opened it. Inside were documents. Scholarship endowments, 9 of them, routed to law students from under-resourced backgrounds. Financial compensation, wired quietly to 6 families. Not large amounts, but specific, the kind of specific that required someone to know exactly who had been harmed and how. At the bottom of the email, no signature. Just a link to a public cooperation statement filed with 2 separate police investigations. Isabella read the email once. Twice. She set her phone down. "Sophia," she said. "Yeah. I need to take a walk." She called him. She hadn't planned to. She had been walking for 40 minutes along the riverside path, arguing with herself in the way that her mother called making up your mind, when she found the phone already in her hand. He answered before the second ring. Isabella, I want to meet, she said. But I'm choosing the terms. Anything you need. I'm not forgiving you, she said. I need you to know that clearly before I say anything else. The things that happened, the harm that your operations caused, those don't disappear because of a press conference or a scholarship fund. I know, he said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Then what are you asking for? A pause. Long enough to be real. Time, he said, to show you what the decision is worth. You said it yourself. The world doesn't move because of powerful men. It moves because of their choices. Another pause. I am choosing. She stood at the railing above the river, watching a barge pass below. Sunday, she said. The park near the East Bridge. 11 o'clock. I'll be there. Luca. Yes. Don't be late. He was there at 10:47. The conversation they had that Sunday lasted 4 hours. They sat on a bench, then walked, then sat again. She asked him questions that no one had ever asked him. Not hard questions or prosecutorial ones, but questions that required him to be honest about what he had known and when he had known it. He answered every one. When he didn't know the answer, he said so. When the answer was unflattering, he gave it unflattering. She didn't forgive him, but she didn't walk away either. What she did instead was something more careful, and in his experience more rare. She stayed present. She listened. She disagreed when she disagreed, which was often. She said at one point, I don't understand how you justify it to yourself. And he said, stop justifying it. The justification was the problem, and she went quiet in a way that was different from anger, more like someone processing information that had to be filed into the correct category. At the end of the afternoon, as the light was going orange and long across the water, she said, I'm not where you need me to be. Not yet. I know, he said. I'll need to see it, she said. Not hear about it. See it. Real change over real time. That's fair. And if it stops, if at any point this becomes performance, then you walk away, he said. And you be right, too. She looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that was almost the thing from before, that direct, comfortable, assessing gaze, but filtered through everything that had happened, which gave it a complexity it hadn't had at the start. You're still more interesting than I expected, she said quietly. You're still more dangerous than you look, he replied. She almost smiled. Almost. If you're still watching, comment Chancellor below. Let us know how you're feeling about Luca right now, because we want to know. 3 weeks after the Sunday in the park, Isabella had dinner with her mother. Mrs. Carmen Reyes was 62 years old, had raised 2 children largely alone after her husband's death, and had developed over the course of her life an ability to read people that her children described to their friends as either a gift or genuinely terrifying, depending on the context. Isabella had mentioned Luca twice, once in passing, once in a way that was supposed to be passing, but was not. That had been enough. Bring him, her mother had said, over the phone. Mama. Just for dinner. I'll make the thing with the plantains. The plantains are not a reward. You make the plantains for everyone. Then he's lucky. I like everyone. A pause. Bring him, Mija. Luca arrived exactly on time, which Mrs. Reyes noted with a brief, approving nod that she did not make obvious. He brought flowers, not an extravagant arrangement designed to impress, but a simple bunch from a market stall, the kind of flower someone buys because they know the gesture matters and don't need to amplify it. Mrs. Reyes noted that too. At the table, he did not perform charm. He did not deploy the controlled, measured presence that Isabella had seen him use in every room that required him to project authority. He simply sat at her mother's table and was present, which was, in Mrs. Reyes's considerable experience, much harder to fake than charm. He asked about her work. She had been a community health worker for 30 years, with genuine curiosity. When she talked about the funding cuts that had decimated her department, he asked follow-up questions that showed he'd actually processed what she said. He refilled water glasses without being asked. He complimented the food once, specifically, accurately, without hyperbole. Mrs. Reyes watched all of this from across the table while talking about entirely other things. After dinner, while Isabella was in the kitchen, he helped clear the table. Mrs. Reyes stood beside him at the counter and said, in a matter-of-fact tone she used for things that required precision, "My daughter is not someone you manage." "No," Luca agreed. "She will see through management immediately. Even noticed. And she does not forgive easily, but when she does," Mrs. Reyes looked at him directly, "it is real, and she would expect it to be matched." Luca met her eyes. "I understand." She studied him for a moment longer, with the thoroughness of a woman who had been studying people for 6 decades. "Power is easy," she said. "Almost anyone with enough resources can acquire it. Integrity is expensive. It costs you things you are using. Not everyone can afford to pay." "I'm paying," Lucas said. She nodded once. It was not absolution, but it was something. Later, when Luca had gone and the dishes were done, Isabella sat on the edge of the kitchen, counted the way she had as a child. "Well," she said. Her mother dried her hands on a kitchen towel and considered the question for a moment. "He looks," she said finally, "like a man trying to outrun his past." A pause, which is different from a man running from it. Isabella was quiet. "The question is whether he's fast enough," her mother said. She patted Isabella's hand and went to bed. The fellowship letter arrived on a rainy Wednesday in November. Isabella read it standing at her kitchen counter, still in her coat, because she'd opened the email on her way through the door without knowing what it contained and then stopped moving entirely. 6 months. Geneva, one of the most competitive legal fellowships in the world, specifically in financial crime regulation. She had applied 8 months ago, before Luca, before any of this, and she had applied with the full conviction that this was what her life was supposed to look like. She sat down on the kitchen floor, still in her coat, and held her phone and felt several large things collide inside her chest simultaneously. She called Luca that evening. He listened without interrupting while she told him. When she finished, the silence lasted 3 seconds. "When do you leave?" he said. "January. If I accept, you're accepting." "Luca." "Isabella." His voice was very quiet. "You applied for this before any of this existed. It is exactly what you have been working toward. You're going to accept it." "It's 6 months," she said. "Yes. Geneva. I know where Geneva is. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying." He paused, and she could hear him thinking. "I'm not going to ask you to make your life smaller to accommodate what we are." "That is not," he stopped. Started again, more carefully. "The man I was would have found a reason for you to stay. The man I'm trying to be needs you to go and do what you're supposed to do." Another pause. "Go. Build the future you believe in." She was quiet for a long time. "You can't be that reasonable about this," she said. "I can try. It's infuriating. I know. I really want you to say something inconvenient right now, so I have something to argue with. I know that too." She could hear the faint warmth in his voice. Not quite a smile, but close. "Go, Isabella. I'll still be here when you come back." She pressed her eyes shut. "Promise?" "Yes," he said. "I promise." She accepted the fellowship the next morning. 6 months is a specific kind of time. It is not so long that it becomes another life. Not so short that it fails to change things. Isabella moved through Geneva like someone who had been pointed at a problem they had studied for years and finally given the tools to approach it directly. She was in rooms with regulators and prosecutors and legislative advisors, in working groups that existed to do exactly what she had written about, build the teeth that accountability needed. She worked long hours with the focused intensity of someone who had found the exact right thing. She called Luca on Tuesday evenings because Tuesdays tended to be less chaotic for both of them. The calls were long, sometimes 2 hours, which surprised her. She had expected them to become shorter over time, the way calls do when 2 people are managing a gap rather than bridging it. Instead, they found, in the remove of distance and the clarity that distance sometimes brings, a rhythm of honesty that was different from what they'd had in person. She told him about her work. He told her about his. His restructuring had moved out of the emergency phase and into the slow, public, accountable phase, which was harder in some ways because there was no adrenaline left, only the daily work of doing it correctly. "Is it what you expected?" she asked him on a Tuesday in March. sitting in her Geneva apartment with the lights of the city below. "No," he said. "Harder. Not harder. Just different. More boring in some parts." A pause. "More real. That's usually the trade." "Yes." Another pause. "How was the team?" She told him about the team. He listened the way he always listened, completely, with the full weight of his attention, not as a performance of interest, but as its honest expression. She had come to understand over these 6 months that this was one of the things that had unsettled her from the beginning, that he listened to her the way she had always wanted to be listened to, and the experience of it was both very good and very complicated. "I'm coming home in 3 weeks," she said. "I know," he said. "I just thought I should say it specifically. I'm glad you did." She looked at the lights of Geneva. She thought about a museum, and a park, and a kitchen, and a park bench, and a million small moments across months that had accumulated into something she had stopped pretending she could define easily. "Luca," she said. "Yes. I'm not there yet. Fully. I want you to know that I know that." "Okay," he said. "But I'm—" She paused, reaching for accuracy. "Closer." The line was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll take closer," and there was something in his voice that made her close her eyes briefly. Something genuine and unhurried and entirely unmanaged. "Good," she said. "Tuesday next week?" "Tuesday," he agreed. She came through the arrivals gate at 9:10 on a Wednesday morning, carrying too much luggage and looking exhausted in the specific way of someone who has slept badly on a long flight and is fighting through it on sheer determination. He was standing at the barrier. No driver this time. No car at the curb with a man pretending not to listen. Just Luca in a gray jacket, the gray jacket which she recognized and which made something catch at her chest, waiting in the ordinary way people wait. He looked different, she thought. Or maybe not different. Maybe she was just seeing him more clearly now, the way things look clearer after months of looking at them from a distance. Less guarded, or guarded differently. The guard a man who has made choices he is living with, rather than a man protecting something he cannot afford to lose. She pushed through the gate. He didn't move toward her immediately. He let her come to him, which was either restraint or respect, and she thought, watching his face, that it was both. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. "You look," she considered, less like a funeral director. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. "You look like someone who slept badly on a 12-hour flight." "I did." She set down the heaviest bag. "I thought about what I wanted to say on the way here. I had a whole speech planned. What happened to it? I'm too tired for speeches." She looked at him directly, with that clear and comfortable gaze that had unsettled him the first time he saw it, and had never entirely stopped. "I'm home," she said, "and I'm glad you're here. And that's all I have right now." "That's enough," he said. He picked up her heaviest bag. They walked through the airport together, not touching, not filling the silence, and the silence was the same one it had been from the beginning, practiced and unhurried and full of the particular ease of two people who were, in some way they were still learning to articulate, home in each other's company. The boardroom was different now. That was the first thing you noticed if you had seen it before, not the furniture, which was the same, or the view, which was the same, but the quality of the light. The old boardroom had been maintained in a specific kind of controlled dim, the lighting calibrated over years, consciously or not, to the business being done in it. Dim enough for uncertainty to pass without being examined too closely. Dim enough for the things beneath the table to stay beneath the table. Somebody had opened the blinds. Luca sat at the head of the table, which was also the same, but the people around it were different. External auditors. A representative from the Financial Intelligence Unit, the same unit Isabella had once interned with, which had not escaped anyone's attention, least of all Luca's. 2 attorneys from Dr. Chen's firm. 2 representatives from a logistics association that had been watching the restructuring for 6 months and had, cautiously, indicated an interest in formal partnership. The contract on the table was 47 pages long. It had been reviewed by 4 separate parties. Every clause was readable by anyone who asked. Every party was documented. Every revenue stream could be traced to a real service rendered. Luca read the summary page, not because he hadn't already read the whole document, but because this particular moment seemed to warrant being done deliberately. He was aware of a kind of quiet that was different from the quiet of his old boardroom. Less the quiet of suppression, more the quiet of people in a room being honest with each other, doing the slow, unglamorous, important work of building something that would hold. He thought about his father, briefly, who had started an empire on fear and built it on distance. He thought about Grieve, signing a document he didn't understand with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. He thought about a man who had died in Switzerland of natural causes at the center of a web of paper. He thought about Isabella, saying, "The world doesn't move because of powerful men. It moves because of their decisions." He picked up the pen. He signed. He set the pen down, looked out through the open blinds of the city, at the same city, the same view, the same enormous, indifferent movement of people with their lives and their systems and their choices. All of it the same and all of it different, because what had happened in this room was different. Because what he was now was not what he had been. He was not going to pretend it was enough. The harm that had accumulated across years did not evaporate because a restructured company signed a transparent contract. The work was long. The debt was real. The undoing of things was slower and more complicated than the doing of them. And that was correct. It was appropriate that it cost something that was boring and difficult and public and subject to scrutiny from people who had every reason not to trust him. But he was also not going to pretend it meant nothing. He had chosen. That was the start. Later that afternoon, sitting in his apartment, he sent Isabella a photograph. Just one. The boardroom, the blinds open, the sunlight filling the room, the signed contract visible on the table. No Kopschen. She replied 40 minutes later. A single word. Good. And then, tell me about it Tuesday. He smiled. Actually smiled. The full version, which he had been told on previous occasions, was a significant enough event to be worth remarking on. He put his phone down. He looked out at the city. He thought, let's see what else we can build. The best stories are not about perfect people. They're about people who choose, who stand at the window long enough to understand what is on both sides of it, and then open it anyway, knowing what the air will cost them. Luca Moretti had been untouchable for a long time. And then a woman with an honest gaze and a thesis on criminal financial networks sat across from him at a dinner table and looked at him the way no one had looked at him in years. Not for what he controlled, not for what he could do, but for what he might choose. And the untouchable became simply a man. A man who chose. That's the whole story. That's all any story is. If you made it to the end of this one, first of all, thank you. This one was made for the people who stay. If it moved you, if it made you think, if Luca and Isabella made you feel something hit that like button, it genuinely means everything, and it helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we have more stories coming, and you do not want to miss what's next. And drop a comment. Tell us, are you Team Isabella staying, or should she have walked? What was the moment that changed your mind about Luca? We read every single one, every single comment. See you in the next one.